This was largely copied from the British Sea Harrier, which had come into service at the beginning of the 1980s. By this time, the British had given up large fleet carriers on budgetary grounds. But the Sea Harrier, operating from light carriers, enabled the Royal Navy to retain a fixed-wing capability. However, the aircraft could not take off vertically with a full load of munitions. A serving naval officer therefore designed a ski ramp, which overcame the problem. This was only just in time, for naval aviation was about to undergo its most severe test since 1945. On the 2nd of April 1982, Argentinian forces invaded the Falkland Islands deep in the South Atlantic. They quickly overwhelmed a small British garrison and declared the Malvinas, as they called the islands, part of Argentina. The following day, the Argentinians also seized South Georgia, 800 miles to the east. On the 5th of April, a naval task force left Britain to sail 7,000 miles to reclaim the islands. It was built around 2 light carriers, Hermes and Invincible. These had a combined total of just 20 Sea Harriers on board. Facing them, the Argentine Air Force could boast some 200 fixed-wing aircraft, including French-built Mirage 3s, as well as Super Étendard, Israeli-built Daggers, and American-built A-4 Skyhawks. These aircraft could operate from the airfield at Port Stanley, or from air bases in southern Argentina, 200 miles away. The Argentinians also had an aircraft carrier. Given that the nearest land base available to the British was Ascension Island, still nearly 4,000 miles from the Falklands, the odds seemed stacked against them. Nevertheless, on the 12th of April, as the task force continued to steam south, the British declared a total exclusion zone covering a radius of 200 miles from the Falklands to all Argentine ships. The first threat faced by the task force was submarines, of which the Argentinians had 4. This was where the British naval helicopters came into their own. These used sonar buoys, which, dunked into the water, can detect the noise of a submarine's engine. Once detected, the helicopter could attack it with sonar torpedoes. However, the submarine threat to the British task force en route to the Falklands never really materialized. But both sides also employed maritime patrol aircraft to shadow each other's ships, the Argentinians using specially converted C-130 Hercules. In this way, the British knew that the Argentine fleet had put to sea. Indeed, only adverse weather prevented its carrier from launching an air attack against the task force. However, the British submarine HMS Conqueror also shadowed and then sank the cruiser General Belgrano. This put paid to the Argentine naval threat. By now, the British task force was only 200 miles away from the Falklands and within range of land-based aircraft. For the Harrier pilots, the moment of truth had arrived.
Now my world was coming alive. My mind was clear of all the subjects that had given me a pain over the past few days, and I concentrated on what I loved best. Nozzle stop set to 50 degrees. Check engine with nozzles down. Looks fine. Nozzles aft. The whole aircraft nodded in tune to the movement of the nozzles. Set RPM at 55%. Nav lights to steady. Check the flight deck crew are to one side. Check the green light from Flyco. And even before the flight deck officer had brought his Star Wars green wand down to the deck, I'd hit the throttle to the left-hand corner and released the brakes. The ski jump loomed ahead of me and then disappeared from view. I was pressed down in my seat for a second, and then I was free.
The target of this initial Sea Harrier operation was Port Stanley Airfield. The strike took the Argentine defenders by surprise. The Harriers then returned to the carriers. The relief and elation of the pilots was plain. Vulcan bombers from Ascension also attacked the airfield, but it involved numerous air refuelings to get them there and back. All this caused the Argentinians to dismiss any ideas of operating their harder-hitting aircraft from Port Stanley Airfield. Further success for the task force took place on that same day, when a Harrier shot down an Argentine Mirage with a Sidewinder missile. But on the 4th of May, 2 Super Étendard aircraft from the mainland flew low towards the task force. They were armed with Exocet air-to-surface missiles, which they launched at a point 30 miles from the British ships. The ship-borne radars detected some activity, but the operators could not decide whether a missile attack was imminent. Next moment, an Exocet penetrated the Type 42 destroyer HMS Sheffield amidships, on her starboard side. Even though the missile did not explode, its remaining fuel started a fire which could not be controlled. Sheffield had to be abandoned and was later sunk. The arrival of her badly burnt survivors on board Hermes not only affected her crew, but the whole of the task force and the British public, who saw it and the stricken destroyer on their television screens at home. It was the first time that a British warship had been lost in action in more than 35 years. This was real war. But the loss of HMS Sheffield was also a stark reminder of how vulnerable surface ships were to air attack. Yet the British ships had sophisticated radars and various means of defeating a missile attack. What had gone wrong? Once detected, the missile can be shot down by another missile. Sheffield was equipped with Sea Dart for this purpose. Sea Dart does, however, have a minimum range. But other ships were equipped with the shorter range Sea Wolf, which is designed to cope with missiles within Sea Dart's minimum range. Alternatively, Sheffield could have fired chaff. Chaff is made up of strips of aluminium foil, designed to confuse the missile's radar guidance system. But the main problem was the failure to detect the Exocet. This seems to have been caused, at least in part, by Sheffield's satellite communications interfering with her radars. But back to the Falklands. The next phase was the actual landings. These took place in sheltered San Carlos Bay on the 21st of May. they were unopposed. But the British shipping gathered in San Carlos water was a tempting target. The Argentinians took full advantage, but could not afford to expend further exocets in their attacks on the ships at anchor in San Carlos. They had possessed only 5 exocets at the outset of hostilities. Consequently, they relied on iron bombs. These dumb bombs scored a number of hits on the British ships. Some of these hits were fatal. But many bombs had been incorrectly fused, and hence the damage was not as severe as it might have been. The Sea Harriers were now put under severe pressure. Pilot fatigue was growing. They had, however, been reinforced by additional aircraft sent out by ship from Britain. The Harrier's extreme maneuverability came into its own, and it shot down a number of Argentine aircraft. This helped to secure the beachhead, and the advance to Port Stanley could now begin. But the Argentinians were not yet finished in the air. On the 25th of May, another Exocet attack was launched, the Super Étendard being refueled en route by a C-130 tanker. Chaff caused the missile to veer away from the warships, but it fatally damaged the merchant vessel Atlantic Conveyor. On board were 8 transport helicopters, whose loss would severely slow down the advance on land. Then, on the 8th of June, 2 British logistic landing ships were attacked by Skyhawks, suffering severe damage and heavy casualties. Six days later, British troops entered Port Stanley. The Falklands had been regained, but it had been a close-run thing, since 1 or 2 more ships sunk could have spelt disaster. As it was, it showed that the warship was still vulnerable to attack from the air.